It seems like a lot of podcasters who make weekly, bi-weekly, or even monthly shows eventually experience something similar. In some way or another, their show changes over time. In the case of Sam Sethi, that meant merging Podland Daily with Pod News Weekly.
As much as I would enjoy having that conversation, it wouldn't have longevity as a podcast. It would probably be a season, probably get through 30 or 40 influences of interest, and the repetition would be quite high because most people will say the same thing. Either it's a Rode mic or a Shure mic, and then it'd be like, oh, right, okay, well then let's not ask that question for the 50th time.
Next, he and Matt catch up for a conversation about how his show has changed. My name is Stuart, and this is Audience, a Castos original series for podcasters in the pursuit of creating better audio and uncovering the business that powers audio creators. Speaking of making better audio, Castos can help. With our team of professionals, we can help you make your show. Add in our suite of integrative tools like Stripe or our private podcasting app, and Castos has everything you need to bring your podcast to life. Learn more by emailing hello@castos.com or by clicking on the link in the show notes. So if you follow Podland and Pod News, you may have noticed some recent changes. Our executive producer Matt Medeiros caught up with Sam Sethi to chat about it.
I, like a lot of folks in the podcast industry, were like, episode 100, Sam's going away. Not quite. Not quite. What did you do with Podland and why?
James gave me an ultimatum. It's going under my brand or you can leave. No, it didn't. No. I think it was a case of James had been to Dallas and people were getting confused between, oh, yeah, I listened to your thing called Podland Daily and Pod News Weekly. And James was like, no. Pod News Daily is this and Podland is over here. And so James said, look, should we just put it under one brand? I went, yeah, I'm not bothered. That's cool. So we're now Pod News Daily, which James does, and then Pod News Weekly, which James and I do once a week.
So Pod News Weekly, if you've not heard it, we, the collective industry, have Pod News, where it's a daily flash of 3 to 5 minutes, depending on what the news is. Headlines talking about what's happening in the podcast space. Podland was always in my eyes, how I had seen it, was always the extension of that, of going deeper on the topics that were the bigger topics of the week. Now all under one roof. Branding changed, all of that stuff changed. I also noticed the format of the show changed. So a slight change in audio design, segment transitions and all that stuff. Was that just like right off the cuff and it just happened in the next episode? Or did you guys spend some time like thinking about how that transition was made? Because it was pretty impactful. Small changes, but it was impactful for me as a weekly listener.
Oh, thank you. No, we didn't spend a lot of time doing that. We both got radio backgrounds, so both of us have been live radio presenters. We're used to that type of setup, and we've also realised that we want to make it smaller and tighter. We want to make it less verbose. People's time is precious. So the average Podland was about an hour, but it then started going longer, and James was getting more upset with me for interviewing people much longer.
It seems so James is the root of all of these issues lately.
He's the boss. So it fundamentally said, look, if we're going to change the name of the show, let's tighten it up. Let's make it a little bit more, in the format that we wanted to make it from day one.
I know you took a little bit of flack from somebody that you guest hosted with on the Audience podcast, Adam Curry,
yes.
About the editing through Descript and stuff like that. Descript now recently launched a new version, announced some massive round of funding. I think you might be speaking to them in the future.
Literally straight after this interview.
Yeah, nice. Nice. Are you still using all that tooling? And how did you adjust as a seasoned podcaster / radio person when you heard some of that feedback?
No, it's good. I always, look, being a radio presenter is fine. I mean, that's something that you either can do or you don't. And being live is fun. It gives you that extra edge. But actually editing with Descript, it is a fine line between over-editing and over-umming and erring and de-erring and doing all of that stuff and having some natural voice. I think I don't go to the edge where Adam says do no editing and Todd is no edit. I mean, yes, he's done 1,600 shows and he hasn't edited one of them, so that's fine. But we do actually pre-record because James is in Australia and I'm in the UK, so we don't really see. Sadly, we would do it live, but America's asleep, and that's the biggest audience that we have. So it would make no sense to talk to 3 people in America at 2 a.m, which is what it would be for them. So we do take that opportunity to edit. But no, look, I'm very open to people more experienced, more knowledgeable than me, like Adam, giving me feedback that maybe I should push back on it. So James now actually, to be fair, does the editing for Pod News Weekly as well. So he's a little bit less tighter on the ums, the ers, the you knows, the whats. And I do the interview editing. So we split it up that way.
Yeah. As somebody who uses Descript to edit one of my shows and produce one of my personal shows, not at audience, Stuart is on the call. He's the guy in charge of that. If he saw me slide Descript onto the screen, he would throw something at me. But for the novice editor and / producer, it works really well for me. And as somebody who listens to many forms of podcasts, I actually didn't mind that edit. And I know we're getting in the weeds here, but audience is about creating podcasts for folks. I didn't mind the hard edit of Descript because the context of the show to me is the discussion around news topics. So I was never like, I feel like I'm missing something. No, it's like your point of view, James' point of view, discuss, headline, move to the next. And I really appreciated that, right? But I understand also that preserve the nuances of the human voice because, my God, AI is taking over everything. We'll talk about that in a moment. So just as a side note, it never really bothered me. And I appreciated it under that context. But now, personally, let's transition to what you're going to do personally now. A couple months ago, you mentioned you might go out and do another podcast. I won't say the name of it because maybe you're still going to do that other podcast.
No. So, I was going to do a podcast called Off the Mic, and it was really going to be getting people like yourself, Matt, to come on and talk about your life away from podcasting. And it was just going to be a fun, irreverent sort of, hey, Matt, what's your favorite drink? How did you get into it? The standard questions we all get asked as podcasters. What's the best mic to use? Where, should you use this, that, and the other? So it was going to be that, but I realized that as much as I would enjoy having that conversation, it wouldn't have longevity as a podcast. It would probably be a season, probably get through 30 or 40 influences of interest, and the repetition would be quite high because most people will say the same thing. Either it's a Rode mic or a Shure mic, and then it'd be like, oh, right, okay, well then let's not ask that question for the 50th time. And so one of the things I did before I joined James on Pod News was I had my own podcast called Sam Talks Technology. And just to wind back a little bit before that, I started TechCrunch Europe. So I was a blogger and a journalist talking to loads of startups, and I was an entrepreneur myself, having done 3 or 4 startups. So for me to go into doing TechCrunch and then be blogging about it, then to take that knowledge set and bring that into my first learning of podcasting about 5-6 years ago was how I did it. So that got to over 150 episodes, and I then joined James and I stopped that one. But I have an interest in technology outside of just podcasting, right? Yesterday, and on this week's show for Pod News, we're interviewing Chris Messina, the guy who invented the hashtag. But Chris and I have known each other 25 years, and Chris was working on something called Activity Streams 10 years ago with Kevin Marks, who's another friend, and Joseph Smar, and we were all part of this network of people talking about micro formats. And of course, it's all come back in because of Twitter and Mastodon. And there was no space for me to talk about that. That wasn't a conversation really that should fit naturally into Pod News, is because it sort of is a bit about podcasting, but it's going away from it. But then I've got a great love for what's going on with Satoshis and micro payment systems. That has really, again, no real place in a native podcast. And so, Sam Talks Technology is what's coming back. So, I'm excited.
heck of a time to be revisiting technology and big tech. I mean, the world is these big tech companies are painting a picture that those of us that have been in tech for decades, like both of you and I have seen the rise and fall. Like the lesson I always go back to is like, remember Facebook pages? Remember when Facebook was like, get everybody to like a page, and everyone said, we're going to get everybody to like a page, and then you got 1,000 people to like a page, and they said, guess what? It's going to be a nickel. Yeah, it's going to be a nickel to reach every one of those people. We'll let you reach them for 10 cents or 10% of them for free. We've seen this story, and I'm sure you have seen stories prior to in the golden age of Linux, Microsoft, and that battle of the browser. What a time for centralized versus decentralized. It looks like the world needs decentralized everything. What's your take? Like, what do you see as the next tech to emerge from this? Is podcasting going to explode from this? Are people going to revisit blogging and RSS again? Like, where do you see people falling onto in the coming months?
I don't see Mastodon really taking over from Twitter. I think, right now I say Elon's punch drunk with having got power, but he'll sober up. He'll realize that he fired some of the wrong people. He'll realize that the blue tick has value and that he shouldn't have done what he did with it. He'll come good, I think, or he'll be the first person to destroy $44 billion worth of value, right? So as much as I want an open distributed ecosystem, I'm not sure that Mastodon's going to be it. They may be the son of Twitter. Maybe it's what, Jack left, with Twitter Blue, some of the Blue Sky stuff. There's a great piece of technology called Nostr. I don't know if you've seen, that's been going out. That may be interesting as a protocol. But before all of that, before any of that distributed stuff happens, I think one of the things that the whole of the internet from day one, so I was lucky enough to be the product marketing manager at Netscape in the battle for, the browser war. And Mark Andreessen said that his biggest mistake was never creating a micropayment system. And as a result, we ended up with advertising as a way of monetizing, or we ended up with hearts, likes, and claps as a way of sentiment. Now, with micropayments and Satoshis and that, which I'm really excited about, and that works well within podcasting for value, but it also works outside of podcasting. I think that's the next 2023, 24 explosion in terms of consumer adoption of a new technology. I think that will be, I remember saying to people, and you will know this, Matt, right? Yes, it's called a URL. HTTP. Yeah, I know. Stick with me. / / Yep. All the W's. Keep going. We're nearly there. Name of the place. .com. No. .co. No. Well, anyway, you'll get there, right? And I remember nobody thought that would ever catch on. And now it's second nature. So the language of Satoshis and, invoices and digital wallets and all of that conversation is geeky, but it's becoming simpler. It's the complexity is being hidden more and more each day, to the point where actually, I think going back to Elon, Jack left a micropayment system using Satoshis inside of Twitter. If he turns that on, potentially 300 million people will have a digital wallet using sats. That could be a real game changer that ripples out across the whole industry.
Yeah, I agree. So when we chatted last time, you probably don't remember. I've made a career in the WordPress space. I've covered WordPress on my podcast. And one of the things, as a diehard WordPress user, someone who loves the ability to create my own website, have my own blog, have my own podcast, open source, the community around open source. As much as I love all that, and I'm an advocate for it, when I'm in my co-working space right now, there's a bunch of other entrepreneurs in here. If somebody were walking in and saying, I need to start a business website, what do I turn to? I might second guess the WordPress recommendation, only because I know the onboarding experience is hard. There's a learning curve. It's tech. And I don't know if this Twitter mass exodus to Mastodon is going to work out, because I don't know if the common folks are ready to really give back to what makes open source work. And it's not just using the app. It's providing feedback. It's writing documentation. It's writing code. It's donating to the people who keep these things alive. And as much as I wanted to succeed, I feel like this is that a steroid or an injection into taking common people into an open source world and them going, wait a minute, where's all the shiny features that we had? Why can't I live stream? Why can't I do a Twitter space on Mastodon? And then everyone's going to go, yeah, I guess we'll go back to Twitter now. I'm not saying I want that. I would love everything to be open source, but I think that there's a good balance. Have you thought about like open source, and are the common folks ready for that experience yet?
Well, that's the challenge we've got inside of podcasting, right? There's all of us looking at podcast namespace and adding all these great tags. And there's Spotify sitting in its closed wall going, nah, we're just going to make Anchor and we're going to load video and it can only play inside of us. No, we're not going to make it an open standard. No, we're going to do this. And that's exactly what happened with Netscape and Microsoft. I remember, you probably remember the term ActiveX. You know, this was going to be the plugin architecture for the web and blah, blah, blah. And no, we were talking about HTML and they'd put in these proprietary tags and whatever. It's fundamentally open goes slower than closed goes. And that's the problem. But eventually, like the tortoise and the hare, the tortoise does catch up and the hare burns out. And I think, you know, we've seen that in the browsers. We will see it with Spotify. We do know, for example, Apple have now, a little cracks appeared. They've put the first namespace tag in the Apple ecosystem, podcast.txt. Amazing. Now, if they can do one namespace tag, they can do others, like the person tag and the transcript tag. So we have a lot of hope that Apple could become that shining knight in armor who is on the open side of the conversation and leaves Spotify as this island on its own. Now, if that happens, it's a game changer. So, yeah, but equally going back to Twitter, Matt, you know, it wouldn't take 2 seconds for, I don't know what your Mastodon handle is, but mine is at Sam Sethi at podcastindex.social. Well, actually, at Sam Sethi at twitter.com would be my Mastodon account if they enabled it, which wouldn't be a stretch. That, you know, everyone understands what your at address is. So at address at Mastodon server isn't a hard thing to do, but it's new and people don't like new.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm watching closely, again, being in the WordPress space, but also related to Castos, is Automatic, right? So WordPress.com, WordPress.org, which is the open source side. Matt Mullenweg, who's the founder of that, who's also the owner of Pocket Casts and Tumblr. And I saw sort of a spark in his eyes, if I could say that, through the lens of Twitter, because now I see him starting to look at Tumblr as this is a moment to strike for revitalizing Tumblr. And I saw him looking into, hey, how can we best connect up to Mastodon? Because he gets it as much as I struggle with, you know, some of the decisions he makes about open source WordPress. He gets open source. He gets the value of it, and I hope that if he makes Tumblr this connection to Mastodon, that's pretty cool. Tumblr has its own issues. Like, I feel like I'm in like an anime comic book getting slapped around when I open it up. Like, I don't even understand what I'm supposed to do in this thing.
I've actually opened Tumblr for 10 or 12 years or however long.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I try to use it and because I follow Automatic and stuff like that, but I don't know how. But I would love a good steward of open source to run a social platform, if that makes sense. And I hope that we can see it. Do you get heavily involved in the podcast index Mastodon?
Heavily, no. I tend to have conversations with Dave and Adam off Mastodon. I'm working on a new platform I'm building, which is using a lot of those tools, and it's something I can't talk about today. I'm sorry, but I will talk about, I'm sure, very publicly soon. But yeah, a lot of that stuff. So I'm very, very engaged with what they're doing and why they're doing it, you know. And I think what Adam and Dave have done, clearly for all of us, right, is reopened podcasting and made it interesting and made it exciting again and made it evolve. Apple, great stewardship, but they sort of rested on their laurels. And I think Spotify for the next couple of years, we are going to be fighting Spotify. They will go faster than we can as the open source podcasting community, because they can spin on a sixpence and turn new features on and give it to their whole audience. And we have to then, agree as a community on that feature and then implement, and that can take time.
Yeah. There's a, it's new. It's probably new to the listeners of this podcast, not new to you and I, but there's this, OP3, which is what we'll try to dumb it down, is this open standard that is allowing podcast hosts or podcasters, if your podcast host allows you to use a prefix, which Castos does, to opt into these analytics and to opt into, right now, the gathering of analytical data with no output yet. So it doesn't really serve a purpose other than it's almost like I'm donating my data to a cause. And hopefully, once there's this substantial amount of information there and something can be done with it, that's number one. Number two, the more podcast hosts like Castos adopt it and podcast apps kind of talk to it, people can then draw up the beautiful graphs that podcasters want to see, like, I don't know, time listened to an episode, how many subscribers you have. That's a fantastic initiative that's come out of it. My only worry, and I don't know what side you take, is the bus factor, because it's led by one guy, John Spurlock. And what happens if John Spurlock gets hit by a bus? We have this system that only he built. This is the beauty and the chaos of open source. One person can make this amazing thing, but it's this one person who made this amazing thing. I don't know if you have any thoughts or have thought about that in the context of podcasting, is like, how can one person create this awesome thing, but we can all build upon it to make it a little bit more stable? That's a pretty big question, but if you have any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear it.
I think you've said it just earlier in this interview, because it's open source and because everyone can see it and everyone can participate and everyone can contribute to it. Not wishing John to be hit by a bus at any time soon, but if John was hit by a bus, everything that he's done to date is available, whereas the engineer within Spotify gets hit by a bus, none of us get to see that, and none of us can improve on it because he takes it with him, right? Or it stays within the walls of Spotify. So that is the benefit of open source, that yes, one person can lead the charge on it, but many of us can actually see the logic, the thinking and the output and interface to it as well as it goes along when we think we've got something to add value to.
Speaking of value, monetization, obviously I think the thing that has you, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that one of the things that has you most excited in this space is the micropayments through Satoshis over the Bitcoin highway, which I'll call it. I really like what folks like Alby are doing. I've done a video on that, on setting up Alby wallet to your Castos account. But I like what Adam likes about it is when we look at stats and when we look at, hey, are people, listening to the show? Are they engaged with the show? Is my show growing? One only needs to look at his or her pocketbook or wallet or bank account and say, I've got money in it. And that's the North Star, right? That's how I know people are engaged in listening. And I like what Alby's doing because you can kind of see that through their tooling to see, hey, somebody boosted me at the 2-minute mark. It must have been what I said here, or it could have been the opening to the show. So I know when people are really engaged, and by engaged, they're handing me money. What's your outlook and what's your hope for that? Is there should be a cry for all podcast apps to support this from folks like you and I, but is that the next speed bump we all have to get over, is getting one big app to do it?
Not one big app. Look, the first part is all the hosts need to support the value tag, right? And that isn't universal for some reason yet. And there's this podcasting host initiative that's come about where, libsynRSS.com and Buzzsprout and various others have got together and said, look, we're going to help market, the new stuff that's coming. It's not Dave and Adam's job to market podcast namespace 2.0, right? They can help initiative it, but they can't market it. And so that may help. So the first thing is I want parity. I want all of these podcast hosts to put it in. RSS.com has it, but why hasn't Buzzsprout? Why hasn't Libsyn, right? So once you get that, that's the first step. The second step is, as I said, we talked about people understanding the vocabulary. It's not difficult, but if you see a QR code, but it's called an invoice and then there's a long string in it, and what do I do with this? Where does it go? We've got to hide all of that and just make it so when I send you an email, Matt, I don't go, well, is it going via SMTP, Matt? Do you use an Exchange server? How do I get to you?
Port 80, port 443.
Yeah, exactly. None of that is needed, right? So that complexity has to be hidden, and that's happening. And then it has to be built into apps like Fountain have done a great job of doing that. Podverse has done a job of doing that. There's others who are coming up with it. So that's great. When we get all of that sort of second nature built in, then I think what will happen is, as a podcast creator, it's lovely to see streaming stats. So how many people are paying me per minute of listening, or boosting me at a specific point and telling me that, whatever I said at that point was great and here's my feedback. I say that there's 4 things missing within podcasting. The one is discovery. That's certainly word of mouth today is the best. But we can have better search engines, better use of categories. So why can't I search by Matt Medeiros? Why do I have to search by the name of your podcast? Why can't I search by your location? Why can't I search by keyword? So those should happen. Interactivity, that needs to happen. Boostergrams is one thing, but creating clips, sharing that, making it so that, my mates can go, what Matt said at minute 10, that's what I want to clip up and send and, use that. And then monetization. And monetization. Look, what would you prefer, Matt? Would you prefer at the end of this that I gave you a clap and a heart and a like and a thumb up? Or would you prefer 1,000 sats or 10,000 sats, right? Yeah. So we geeks have, been playing in the sandpit and trying to make it work and fixing some of the rough edges. As I said, I think 2023, we'll see it becoming more mainstream. I'm fingers crossed that, that actually Elon goes, one of the ways of making Twitter much more valuable is to turn on digital wallets, and that vocabulary then becomes common fare. And we as podcasters, hopefully, will gain from that, reflected glow from that, where people go, I've got a wallet. I know what a sat is. Oh, you want me to pay you some sats? Yeah, there you go, mate. And that's what I think. So it's coming. Hold your horses, but we are getting there.
Awesome stuff. Sam Sethi, where can folks find you now? I mean, obviously every week at Pod News Weekly, same great voice, same great discussion, just painted in red now. But what about your new podcast? Where else can folks connect with you?
So on Twitter, it's Sam Talks Tech, and I'll be posting up there. So some of my guests coming up, I've got Kara Swisher, Jason Calacanis, I've got Dave Weiner. So some really interesting guests. We've just finished an interview with 3 really interesting VCs who are putting money into Satoshi-based businesses. So we're going to be talking about what they see as the place to put your money in. So some great guests. So at Sam Talks Tech. And of course, if you need to get hold of us, it's at Pod News. And then you'll be able to find us there, of course. So at Sam Talks Tech and at Pod News.
Hey there, listener, it's Matt. Before you go, I want to offer you, the aspiring podcaster, 2 special items. Number 1, if you haven't started a podcast yet, or you want to find a better podcast hosting company, start here at Castos. Use our coupon code, AUDIENCE20, that's AUDIENCE20, when you sign up for a new account at Castos.com. Start a podcast like the one you just heard, or about gluten-free muffins, whatever it is, will help you get your podcast out into the world. Number 2, did you know that our Academy is free? Enroll today for free at academy.castos.com. Get access to our courses, videos, and templates, all for free. Thanks for listening to the Audience Podcast today. We hope we're helping you become a better podcaster. All that's left for you to do is share this episode on social media. Bye for now.
And now, this week's podcasting tip.
Hi, it's Sam Sethi here from Pod News. My one advice or tip, create a script. Know in advance some structure of what you're going to do. Don't go blind into your interview. Always research who you're going to be speaking to. Try and make the questions not so obvious so it's interesting to your guest. And at the same time, have some structure to your interview technique, because it will come across better in the end edit. Even if you use Descript and de-um, it will be better when you structure it.
Audience is a Castos original series, created entirely by our in-house production team. Our executive producers are Craig Hewitt and Matt Medeiros. Production assistance is provided by Isel Brill, Jocelyn DeVore, and Marnie Hills. Cover art and website design is by Francois Brill. This episode was hosted by Matt Medeiros and was edited and produced by me. I'm Stuart Barefoot. You can listen to full episodes at audiencepodcast.fm or anywhere they have podcasts.